This is a production of Cornell University.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha and Dan Katz, who invited me, the graduate students, Matt, Ginny, the hosts. It really is very meaningful for me to be the graduate student selected speaker. I am really grateful for that, and I'm grateful to be in the great state of New York, and I will tell you why. So you heard about what my title is, but who am I as a human being? I wanted to start here because I have been greatly shaped by the state of New York. So folks in our world love to talk about, and I understand they're proud to share the generation count on where they are in the land. I'm fifth generation from New York or from New Jersey. So my great grandparents on my father's side were born in New York. So I'm originally, though, from Atlantic County, New Jersey, which is near the shore. And my father's family, again, is multi-generation from Brooklyn. He met my mom, Maria, in the southern part of the state where I grew up, where we have oceans, we have forest. So I grew up with a great appreciation for the environment that really motivates my work now when I think about agricultural conservation and climate adaptation. We had a great culture of food in my family as well, so it's part of my interest in agriculture. And it's also a great time for me to visit my family. So happy birthday to my niece who turns 9 today. And yesterday was my dad's birthday, so I will go to visit them tomorrow. So I always look for an opportunity to come east this time of year if I can. So again, New York is a very important state to me. I have 2 degrees from universities in New York. I lived downstate in the city for 9 years. Fordham University for my undergrad, my master's at Columbia University. My PhD is from Iowa State University. So a lot of connection to folks here through Iowa State. Many roads seem to lead through Ames, Iowa. And I show a picture of my dog, because I love to show pictures of my dog, but also because I don't always feel like I appreciated where I was from enough when I was younger. And I was so eager at age 18 to get a New York State driver's license, but there really is so much beauty in where I grew up, and it really has shaped me, and I appreciate that more as I get older. So I also, my last note on New York is that I want to really take us a second to appreciate how much people here have done to inspire us about the natural world. I have even forgotten until Natasha took me around this morning. I remember Carl Sagan here too, but also Matt and I have collaborated for a long time. I'm going to talk more about that, but Matt is really kind and creative, and the work he's done in teaching has really inspired a lot, as I'll get more into. And of course, Harold's efforts with the soil health program, just making measurement, testing, observation more accessible. And the Bird Lab, I am not exaggerating when I say that this app has changed my life. I think we all want to think about how we do that with the technologies that we advance in our work, but just my appreciation for our backyard birds, the cold weather birds, the seasons of the birds. Thank you to the Merlin Bird app for doing that. So just appreciate the ideas that have come from Cornell University. Okay, enough about New York. You get it. I'm happy to be here. So a little bit more about me professionally and the courses that I teach. So my primary appointment is in teaching. I'm going to talk with you about the middle 2 classes that are upper level courses that I teach. I'm actually on a sabbatical this spring, which is fantastic, first of my career. So I'm not teaching my larger 200 level course that's at the top of my table here, but that's an introduction to lots of different topics in field crop management. And so the latter course that you see, it was something I developed during kind of peak COVID, a short course on the history and culture of agriculture. I haven't had the bandwidth to do that in the last few years, but I'm going to talk about my upper level courses a bit. It's something that I've gotten more enjoyment out of than I might have first realized when I started. So just situating you with what else I'm doing in Nebraska in addition to my research. So let me give you a big picture about Nebraska if you're not familiar with it, to kind of set the scene for my talk about diversifying the landscape. So we are the Corn Huskers. We are in the Corn Belt, the western part of the Corn Belt. We grow a lot of corn and a lot of soybean. They're the predominant crops, and I'm going to get into issues why having only warm season crops can be an issue on our landscape. And compared to where I went to graduate school in Iowa State, there are some great enabling factors that I find for diversification of the landscape, again, the topic of my talk. So we are a big agri-state, top 4 for field crops, top few for cattle inventory, for irrigated acres. We still do have sizable wheat acreage, which is great in terms of diversifying rotations. And we do lead the Corn Belt along with Kansas in terms of no-till acres. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there in terms of diversification and soil health. And we are also an epicenter of women's volleyball and the Sandhill crane migration, which happens this month of the year. So it's a nice place to visit different times of year if you get out our way. So a little bit more about the scene in Nebraska. So I just pulled from the most recent census of agriculture for our congressional district, which runs around Omaha, which is in the east, as you can see right here in the little blue dots. So we have a lot of cropland. We have a lot of money that is derived from livestock. We are, again, a top cattle producing state. The cover crop percent number that you see, 10%, we could do better than that. Room to grow, let's say. So we don't have a lot of cover cropping. There are concerns as you move further west where there's less rainfall about water use of cover crops, but also, we have a harsh winter, maybe different than Ithaca, but not so different in terms of limiting growth of what you can grow over winter. And we have obviously a lot of commodity production, which is subject to all of the uncertainties that surround global markets, conflict, et cetera. So that's a little bit about where we are and more from the Census of Ag and who and what are we farming. So we really do have, according to the last census, very little organic. We don't even score it. Very little direct to consumer, which could offer higher value for farmers. We don't have a lot of racial or gender diversity in terms of who is farming, which is maybe not so unique in the US, but definitely a limitation in terms of who has the opportunity to farm. And then just in the spirit of cover cropping in winter or cool season crops, we obviously are more predominant in corn and soybean than forage, hay, or wheat. So that's just a scene of where we are in Nebraska. And you may look at that and say, oh, things maybe don't look too bad. But there's a lot of challenges related to this, right? So I don't probably have to belabor this point too much, but we know about soil erosion, certainly outplacing replacement rates in wetter years. But it's not just the rain, it's also the wind. So it's like clockwork every spring. We'll get these windstorms when people are planting that lead to car accidents and sometimes fatalities. So there was that major pileup in Illinois in 2023. That was pretty unusual, especially for the eastern part of the Corn Belt, right? But nearly every spring this happens. And I like to remind my students that responsible crop management matters because it's like clockwork. I said every end of spring semester we have something happening. And our aquifer. So that is a very important feature that underpins our productivity. I really cannot emphasize that enough. So we sit atop High Plains Ogallala Aquifer, and there's this kind of dominant thinking or this logic that I hear often that, oh, we're okay with the aquifer because we are not as hot as Texas or Oklahoma. But the reality is, and my colleagues who track the trends of the aquifer do even see some evidence of groundwater decline, even in the eastern part of the state where there is more water. So groundwater, soil erosion. And then when it comes to our own human health, we've got great work going on at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. This is really well known now, even though this work is pretty emergent, about the documentation of higher rates of pediatric cancer in our state. And in counties with greater levels of nitrate and atrazine, there's a correlation. Of course, we don't know that that's a causation, but it's something important that has kind of become more a part of the dialogue, thanks to work that folks at UNMC are doing. And then work from my colleagues in our School of Natural Resources have highlighted some of the decline of pheasants, tiger salamanders, species that people knew used to be more prevalent in our record and our history of people who've lived in the state. So outcomes on a number of fronts that are not necessarily what we would want to see, but we do have solutions, right? So crop diversity, continuous living cover, more cool season plants that are growing and taking up water more times of the year are things that we know that can address these problems in addition to corn and soybean, right? I know that they are not a panacea, but that they could solve a lot of these problems, preventing erosion, runoff, reducing input use in subsequent crops. So that's part of my vision of what could diversify and have a lot of benefit. How do we get from where we are to here? So how do we move from what is dominant? So I'm going to give you right away the conclusion of my talk. What are my practical lessons? I was trying to think about like, how can I hit you with this? So here are my main conclusions, and I'm going to use that to outline the rest of my presentation. So I think there is demand and interest in change. I think it's really valuable when we can diversify the examples that we show to our students. But change is really hard. So how do we wrestle with that? I'm going to talk about a recent research project that we have some valuable information from. and then, leave us with some of the things that we can change, which we can change ourselves and we can change our relationships as a point of empowerment, right? So I'm going to share a little bit at the end about the current work that I'm doing on my sabbatical around mentorship. So I will start by telling you about some few examples with my teaching. And so this is my evidence for that there is demand and interest for solutions and how to implement them. So this course, Cover Crops and Agroecosystems, is something that I've been teaching since 2021, that myself, Matt Ryan, and several other colleagues co-created. Back in 2019, we started working on this. So it took us 2 years to develop. We've written about this, and it's probably my proudest accomplishment in my 8 to 9 years at the university. So the demand and the numbers that I'm showing you here. So since 2021, we've had over 350 students that enrolled in the class. My colleague Sam Wortman and I, so I had to, I showed Matt with the underwear. I got to show myself here too, our Soiler Undies Challenge. Sam and I have taught the class online and in person at UNL. So these numbers encompass all of that, as well as the other institutions who've taught it. And this class has also been adopted for ag professionals via the Midwest Cover Crops Council. And they've had in 2 cohorts over 120 people. So I think the demand for how do we actually try to implement this is really strong. So the course was taught for 3 years with 6 different universities, and we published some work on those first few years, and then we've continued it with a few universities since. And we've had shared lab activities, we've used the same videos, we've used similar quizzes, and we've done these Zoom activities together with the classes throughout the semester. And so there's a lot in this paper if you're interested, or if you want to be talked out of doing a multi-university course, because it's really hard. I say that in jest, but it is a really hard thing that we did. But again, I'm so proud of it. What the paper shows is that students really did value the opportunity to interact with each other, to interact with and learn from other instructors. And just from a professional note too, getting to learn from other people, get ideas from other people has been really valuable and given us confidence to carry it forward, even though we have less universities who are offering it now. And we had in the survey that we did really strong agreement from the students around some of their learning outcomes that we hoped to improve. It was a range of different topics that we cover in the class, from soils, ecosystem services, different human dimensions around adoption of cover cropping. And they gain confidence in making recommendations. And I see that in my senior class that I'll talk about next, because I have students who will take both of them in the same semester, and I can see what they're talking to with farmers, and they are doing really well in kind of the basics of cover crop decision making. So students are doing well. And I just love this quote that just magically appeared one day in a student profile of one of the graduate students who took our course early on, who is actually now an extension educator. And she said she loved the class. She loved that things were so hands-on and that we covered a range of topics. So I know I'm cherry picking this example in this quote, but I do think it is illustrative of the experience that a lot of students are having. And I'm glad to connect with some of the students at Cornell through that. So there is demand. That is my first bullet point to make. And I want to pivot next to other things that I've tried in teaching to talk about the value of diversifying the examples that we give. That gives me confidence that this really can have a benefit to our students in trying to stimulate change. So what I'm going to talk about now might not sound so different than what some of you are doing in your classes, but I think when you see what my students are telling me that they're learning, that there's a real value in it too. So in the fall, I teach a senior capstone course where we travel to farms pre-semester, we learn about farmers' goals and challenges, and then the students work on management plans over the course of the semester. And so since 2020, I've been working with a natural resource district up in Northeast Nebraska. I'll tell you more about that in just a second. And they have a watershed effort, which I'm sure there's lots of projects like this going on in New York too, where they're trying to work with farmers, do education around soil health, giving them more cost share opportunities. So a lot of education, cost share, and we've been embedded in this Bow Creek watershed project where my students come up and we create another shared experience for farmers who are looking for, how do I just nuts and bolts start to do some things differently with nutrient management, cover cropping, et cetera. And so we go up to visit Lewis and Clark Natural Resource District, which is up in the northeast part of the state. So it's like 3 hours due north of Lincoln. It's a really topographic area, some sandier soils. It's an interesting dynamic there because there are folks who will go up to to do hunting, to do fishing. So there's recreation from Lewis and Clark Lake, which is an offshoot of the Missouri River, which is our northern and eastern border in the state. And we do all the things on the trip, right? We do a stream assessment. We work with wildlife biologists from our state game and parks. We go kayaking. It's one of my favorite parts. We talk with farmers. We do in-field soil health assessments at every field site we visit, right? And we visit, the superstar farmers who are really diversified, who have figured a lot of things out. And my students gain so much from them. And they also see how important the whole project is together to create change. So that's a little bit about this partnership that I've had. And I'm going to just show you a handful of student quotes. I won't read all of them. You can kind of scan them. I will narrate them a bit. So when I asked students, what did you learn about water quality on the trip? This was the first year we did the full 3-day trip here. And a student said that water pollution isn't something we always think about, but it should be, which maybe that seems like an obvious reflection, but I appreciate learning this because I'm always trying to understand who my students are and calibrate where they are so that I can meet them and maybe move them forward, right? I really appreciated the multidisciplinary element of this quote, that time is a challenge, that Bow Creek has been polluted for decades, and now we have to do it more quickly. But this student talked about culture, community, sociology. I mean, that's like music to my ears to hear a senior undergraduate student reflect that, right? That this is a multidisciplinary, multifaceted problem. Love this too, that students are seeing that economical conservation farming is actually possible, right? It seems like so much we pit these two things against each other, production and conservation, right? That this student is saying, where I grew up, I've heard farmers talk about how you can't protect the land and be profitable, but Bow Creek is different. The farmers opened our eyes to how you can think in a non-conventional way. So I love that. So I love that the students hear that from other farmers and see that, and they're not just hearing it from me. So that's just a little bit about the value of that diversifying example of bringing them, getting them into the stream assessment. That was one of the first pictures I showed. I actually finally got in the stream this year, so we had a little smaller group, so we didn't have to split up. But so many of the students talked about like how valuable it was for them to just do that stream assessment, which maybe is obvious in other courses, but it was something exciting in addition to being in a corn and soybean field. So with this class in 2019, I also had funding from SARE to work with women landowners to do collaborative planning with their tenants, right? So you might know women own or co-own a significant portion of land, but because the way our society is set up, often they are excluded from decision-making, but they are often really passionate about where they grew up and have a vision for their land that is just not incorporated into their farming principles. So I brought my students to 3 different landowner tenants, and we visited with them. And it was actually pretty challenging because they had to hear what the landowners were thinking about. They had to hear what the farmers were thinking about, and just like the complexity that we talk about in the paper that I'm sharing here. And so I think just the importance of highlighting that there are other decision makers that are out there, that it's not just the farmer operator, that there are people who actually could support their tenants in cost share, in sharing costs of something like cover crop seed, right? But what this student told me that they learned, that we have lots of other really good quotes in the article too about the students, but that these women really cared for their land even though they were away from it. And their perception was that people who inherited ground were just wanting the money. They didn't care what happened to it, right? And I think there's a lot of people who assume that about landowners, but in reality, there could be more people if we found creative ways to integrate them and empower them that might be able to initiate change. So a couple examples from my seniors and upper level courses about the demand, interest, and ability to show them some different examples, I think that can stimulate good learning and change. So I want to take a hard pivot. So I'll just slow for a second and share with you a different research project that I've been working on, where again, I think there's some preliminary findings that could be really valuable in this lesson of change being really hard, but also necessary. So this is a project related to changing the crops that we grow. And it's really grounding me in the practicalities of how hard change can be. So this is an effort that is funded by NSF by the DICES program. So it's the Dynamics of Integrated Social Ecological Systems. I have the QR code here and just a snapshot of our website. And so I probably do not need to remind anybody in the room about the imperative of the challenges that climate change poses to us, that this is already upon us and that we will need to adapt because of it, right? And so the idea in this project, and it's being led by data scientist Emily Birchfeld at Emory University, is to just think about what is possible, what crops will be suitable into the future, and how do we help prepare our communities for change? What are the pathways, policies, economics, technologies, et cetera? So Thriving Future Cropscapes is what we've called the project. And the core of it conceptually is around this modeling that Emily has done, where she uses information about climate, about soils, about inputs, farm size. It's really a random forest algorithm that's fancy, like that's the way that I think about it in my mind of how this works. So she takes all of this data together and she tries to understand where different crops are grown. And so she uses the cropland data layer as the main validating piece. So this map that I'm showing you here is actually what we have shown to farmers in the focus groups that are a part of this project, which is what I want to highlight. But teacher and me, I feel like I need to give you this context of like what we're actually doing in this project before I get to that. So she represents with her model with over 90% accuracy where current crops are grown using climate, soils, and then a bunch of other, she calls it agricultural variables, right, that have to do with farm size and inputs and things like this. And so it's really good. 90% if you do modeling is very good. So she's able to depict where different crops are seen with 90% accuracy, and then she tweaks the model, right? She says, if we have, warmer temperatures, more variable weather, where might crops shift to? Okay, and so what she finds, at least for Nebraska, so I'm not showing you all the modeling. She's got a great 2022 paper in Environmental Research Letters. That's the foundation of what we wrote our grant around, and then she's been tweaking the model through this project since, is that corn and soybean will become less suitable in the future, not maybe significantly, but definitely less suitable. And that there are other crops like barley and sorghum, cool seasons, or no, sorghum is not a cool season, but other crops that could be more suitable into the future. And so this is a foundation of what we've showed to the farmers that have participated in our focus groups and what we get people talking about through this stakeholder informed modeling framework. So I won't go into like too much detail about this, but we have several components to the project. We've had key informant interviews where we talked with really knowledgeable, experienced professionals. We talked to extension folks. We talked to climatologists. We talked to other commodity groups to just get a sense of kind of what are challenges people are seeing, to make sure that we were informing our focus groups and our Delphi survey that colleagues Doug Jackson-Smith and his PhD student Kastub Kumar are working on. If anyone knows how Delphi works, you have a couple phases of integrating feedback from experts. So we're doing those in the 3 states that we're working in this project, which are Nebraska, Georgia, and Ohio, because it's geographically where we are located. So the modeling is more central and eastern US, but we are place-based in our human dimensions work. And so we're doing these focus groups, 3 per state. We did 3 last year. We're doing 3 again this year with beginning farmers, with more conventional farmers, and with more diversified farmers to get their input on our modeling framework. So we're taking all that information and then using that to update the model to say, okay, does this seem realistic to you? What are we missing? And seeing how the model changes. And so just briefly from the interviews that we did to start this project as a snapshot of some of the challenges when we asked about crops or historical influences. And none of these topics are probably a surprise in terms of the ways that climate is affecting what is happening or just what are current and future challenges, variability, extremes, increased pest issues, age of farmers, low profitability and margins. And these interviews were not necessarily meant to be comprehensive, but just to see again that we're capturing some of the most important topics, which I think we probably did our best in terms of what is possible with our survey. And then I want to show, before I get into some farmer quotes, again, here I'm in my phase of why change is hard. So you can probably get a sense these are all hard things that can make a shift even more difficult, even though it's truly necessary. So some of the themes that emerged from the focus groups. So we did our focus groups in our 3 states over the 2025. Andrea Rissing, who is anthropologist at Arizona State University, and Conchi Desai is a PhD student, have been carefully analyzing some themes from our focus groups. And again, probably none of these are very surprising to you in terms of what comes up. And I'm showing you just the theme and then a representative quote. So the reason I picked these is just to kind of show the link here, what we're trying to do with our modeling, that there are elements of cost of inputs that we could change in the model. Availability of labor, things that have some modeling implication, right? So probably, again, none of these are maybe a huge surprise in terms of why people do what they do and what might allow them to shift. So these are all like the capitalization of equipment, commodity supports being the way that they are. We know that underpin the decision-making that people make. So let me show you a few of the quotes that, again, have stimulated in me this like reality of change being hard, because I can be really excited about what I do with my students and the demand from our cover crop class and things like this. But I'm going to start with a few quotes. And this was all from a back and forth that happened at this time when I'm like furiously taking notes in our focus group that capture just, I think, the real richness in this type of research where you're just listening to what people are saying. So this farmer was noting, so this is the more conventionally oriented farmer focus group, and that they shared that, this idea of like, do we really want producers to be jacks of all trades, or do we want them to specialize? And that in society, we're mostly encouraging people to be specialized, right? If you're a dentist or a doctor, you're specialized. Do we want people to shift from that? And then this point here too, that we have a lot of capital investment in farming, and you can't just stop growing what you're doing and shift on a dime. Why would you do that if there's no guarantee in profit? And then in response to that, someone said, if it continues to work, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep leveraging the technology to use it, And then this point about nobody grows corn better than in Nebraska, right? And I think there's like some truth to that in terms of our efficiency and productivity, that we're really good at it. And then I love this back and forth that someone else shared too, that like, this is the market we have. But if everyone was a vegan and drove a Tesla, then the world would look really different. And they made this joke about flat earth society, which I think is funny, but also telling, because there's obviously a recognition in this that consumer demand could drive change. So in the conventional group, related to this, like this is kind of the culmination of this exchange that I thought was really rich, is that it's hard to make a shift. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. It takes a long time to change. And this point here too, that even organic producers, they're growing the same crops that we're growing, and that I tried to do field peas, but that was going to take me 4 or 5 years to really make a shift about. So this quote makes me think about, you just kind of stay with what you know. Maybe I should have titled my talk that. You just stay with what you know. So how do we try to connect with people who we want to have these individual interaction with to help them do something differently, right? So it's hard. So that was like, this happened July of last year. We did our diversified farmer focus group in February. We actually just did the last one a few weeks ago. And so I felt like when I went into that focus group in July, it was like getting like a cold bucket of water dumped on me, because I was like, man, I was so hopeful and optimistic. So I feel like I have to live, all of us, in this tension of like what is possible and where we are. So from the alternative farmers, they see things a little bit differently, right? So when we ask them what change they might want to see, someone said, different. Wouldn't mind if we grew less corn in Nebraska. Ooh, is that controversial to say? I don't know. Maybe not entirely, but another farmer recognizing that when you have small grains, the potential to follow it with a cover crop is really beneficial. So when you have a multi-species cover crop, it really changed your whole perspective. I think a lot of us can relate to that that opens up a whole window of more time and opportunity to grow more crops and have more input savings, input use efficiency. So this group actually was changed my thinking, not just about crop shifting, but just the integration with livestock. So again, I come back to the amount of cattle that we have in Nebraska, and that they're seeing really the opportunity to diversify with cattle and what we can grow with cattle, right? So one of the farmers talking about strip intercropping, right? That like it doesn't have to be less corn necessarily, but if more corn acres had cover crops intercropped or different species intercropped with them for forage, we could do that on a lot of acres. We've got a lot of corn. If we could intercrop more of it, that would be great. So that was, maybe it's obvious, but like that reflection and hearing these experienced diversified farmers talk about it was interesting to me. And then I love this other quote here, this vision of what is thriving. Thriving to this farmer is a patchwork of color and of maybe crop diversity, as it was framed in that context. So So what change would we want to see? Mosaic of color, strip intercropping, some more hopeful toward my what is possible. And then some different reflections on how economics and societal demand might drive change. I think it's probably some interesting differences between these groups. This tension again about what might happen with export markets or societal demand. So one of the farmers thinking that exports could really decline, and that's going to force things to be more local. Of course, I don't know where we are in this time of turmoil and conflict and tariffs maybe, but we know that it's certainly shifted things in recent years. And so here's one vision of, the export market changing and things going back to local. And then societal pressure, right? What is the desire for society? So that first farmer made the joke about Teslas and vegans, but that is something that is some people are paying attention to and thinking about how they might capitalize on it. So change is coming, it's necessary, but we know that it is hard based on all of the forces that keep us ingrained. A lot that's outside of our control, but some that is within our control. So that's where I'm going to close. So I've got a few things to say about what we can change. So change starting within ourselves and our relationships. So what can we change? So this post has lived in my brain since I saw it about 2 months ago. It is from Teresa Opheim, who used to be the director of the Practical Farmers of Iowa. So I'll let you mill on this as I'm chatting. So she now leads a nonprofit in Minnesota. So I would encourage you, if you haven't talked to your friends in Minnesota, talk to them, because it has been a really difficult time there. And a lot of us have connections to the Twin Cities from it being a very important ag state and center of, diversification as well. And so what she's talking about is how difficult it's been in the city of Minneapolis right now. And so she's commenting on what are the things that we can do? What does it mean to fight for a living democracy? And I promise I'm connecting the dots here in my own work and what we can take from this. So this is what really stuck out to me, number 3. Am I teaching the arts of democracy, listening, creative conflict, and mentoring? So what I've been focused on for my sabbatical projects is thinking about the value of excellent mentorship in agricultural fields, right? And so I've been thinking a lot about leadership. I've been thinking a lot about relationships. And this post really resonated with me because I think that we could think about some of these skills as being really important in our teaching and in our mentorship. And the skills that we transfer to our students really matter. How are we trying to build a society that is more connected and more fair, right? So, and I would still argue that principled ethical leadership matters. I've been having great conversations with folks here. It's been a difficult time at the University of Nebraska as well. We've eliminated departments, including Earth and Atmospheric Sciences and Statistics. And that has been very difficult to watch. But I still believe that I can be the leader that I want to be, and I want to encourage everybody to do the same. I still want to believe that principled ethical leadership matters. And what is mentorship, right? So connecting the dots here of how do we build the world? How do we build the relationships with each other that we want to see? So how do we define mentorship? There's actually lots of literature about this. I like this definition that comes from the National Academy's 2019 report that is really excellent. A lot of good information summarized about the science of mentorship. A professional working alliance in which individuals work together to support personal and professional growth, development, relational partnerships to provision, career, and psychosocial support, right? So this definition of mentorship is not necessarily so hierarchical or top-down, and I love thinking about what we do in teaching and mentorship as a working alliance. And the foundation of this is a relationship, right? That it requires trust, communication, a commitment. So this is a nice image, the co-pilot relationship from the National Academy's report. And also from that report, they talk about different structures of mentorship. And I'm just showing this diagram here because it's valuable that we can have peer networks or more collective visions. But really, what's the core of what we do in mentorship? A lot of it is right here, mentor-mentee, the dyad. And so this is really the foundational part of how we transfer knowledge in our fields. Who are our researchers and teachers? What are they going to carry forward in our science? And I think that trying to make ourselves better is really important in that. And it's not just for faculty, but for students and our future and for staff. Let's try to be better at this is my encouragement to all. And so I would just, in closing, thoughts here in my talk share that, there really is an evidence base for how we can do great mentorship. I can promise that you do not need a sabbatical to teach yourself some things, that you could even just look at in the Agronomy, Crop, and Soil Science Society. They have some recommendations about mentorship. They've got webinars. They've got some readings. This book that I've been reading that I've been really enjoying is a quick read. The National Academy's report. It's actually, the more I get into it, the more that I find there are resources and just simple tools, an individual development plan, mentor maps, writing down expectations, so some simple steps. And I say simple, they do still take time, but it's not necessarily extremely complicated, and resources do exist. But really the foundation of the research is continuing to conclude that effective mentoring relationships are characterized by trust, responsiveness, and support, which again, when I think about the world that I hope that we'll see and that we can actually affect change, and much of it is really built in this. So that's what I want to leave us with. So I've added a few thoughts here to the bottom, and I was going to just kind of curate the photos that I have added here. So this is me doing our stream assessment with a wildlife biologist who visits with my students. And again, just changing the perspective. It might not seem like a big thing. Oh, wow, I got agronomy students in the stream. But getting them to realize the effect that what they recommend and how they farm in the future really matters. I was really impressed this year how many students, it was like more than half the class, it was like one of the coolest things we did was that stream assessment. Like, yeah, pretty interesting to actually look at what life is there. Yeah, so showing them that connection, diversifying their experiences, hearing from the farmers who talk about, I want to have my grandkids be able to fish in Bow Creek. That's more powerful than anything that I can show them or talk to them about on a PowerPoint slide, right? And it's just a picture of my team a few years ago at a field day, and some extension and NRCS colleagues that we work with, trying to support my team as best I can, trying to encourage them to support each other, giving them opportunities to travel and network, supporting them as whole humans. That's what's behind some of that photo. So what is my encouragement to you as I conclude here, right? So I know there's a lot we can't change. I feel like as I mature in life, trying to figure out what I can have an effect on and where my energy is best spent, it's really hard. But I do think, seeing what we can change, taking one step for yourself, and it does really matter, in my opinion, how we treat each other, and trying to be the leaders we want to be, even if we're not seeing that modeled at our institutions or in our government. Yeah, that there is some change that we can control. And I feel like a word that always comes up is curiosity. How do we treat each other? How do we establish common ground with people who are different? How do we be curious about them? All things that we can continue to do, and that I'm continuing to try to appreciate every day. So that's what I want to leave you with in my practical lessons. And I thank you for your great attention, and happy to answer some questions. Thanks. Hi.
Well, power to you for taking a large group of ag kids out on a 3-day farm. That's really hard.
Yes, thank you.
Congratulations there. My question is about native species prairie strips, and whether or not you have considered this as part of your landscape mosaic.
Right, so I don't know if that got picked up on the Zoom, but the question first was a compliment for taking students on a trip. I will tell you, it is stressful every year. I'm trying to remember it's always going to be okay. But the second part about prairie strips in cropland, I think it's an exceptional solution, and it has been championed by Iowa State University. And there are some folks that are starting to do it. In fact, the first farmer to do it in Nebraska is up in Northeast Nebraska in this watershed, and he's one of the exemplary farmers that I've taken my students to visit. So I think the data is overwhelmingly clear that if you can do it, it's going to reduce runoff, it's going to improve your soil, it is going to have a lot of benefit for taking a small amount of land out of cropland. And this farmer that we've worked with, so this is just anecdotal, I really don't have research experience with it other than, again, being exposed to some of it from folks at Iowa State. So learn from what they've done, and I wonder if that's happening in New York, I would guess. Maybe. Yeah, no.
Prairies.
But it is a very promising opportunity, in my opinion. Go ahead.
Are most of your students from farming backgrounds in Nebraska, or planning on going into farming?
Yeah, so the question was if most of my students are from farming backgrounds or intend to farm. They are. We still have our undergraduate enrollment has kind of plateaued a bit or maybe declined since I've been there in 8, 9 years, but that is their intent. So how many of them actually are able to farm in their first few years is probably less than I would like. A lot of them are getting jobs off farm, but many of them are. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I'm wondering, I'm always trying to see how we can move what you're presenting to us at the beginning of a research project, and I find it always be stuck away in the work package 7, the sort of the afterthought. And now we do a little bit social science so that we get a grant. How we can get this to the front, because I think this is pivotal for a needs assessment before we do any fancy AI algorithms to develop some science or some spectroscopy. Now, what do we actually need to hit the nail on the head? Where have you seen that? What kind of methods work to bring what you're doing to the front of a project and not sort of as an afterthought?
Have you met Rachel in the back? Great social scientist that's here. Yeah. So the question was just how do we make the social science more front and center so that we're not just doing AI algorithms that don't mean anything? I think it starts with relationships, in my opinion. I mean, the best grants that I've been a part of are the ones that have been more sustained in discussion. So the project that Matt and I worked on, I mean, we met every week in that grant writing period, and then we just kept meeting and meeting. I think it takes time to develop those relationships, the trust, the understanding of what you're trying to do. Our DICES grant, I mean, we started meeting, we wrote that grant in 2021. They had written it actually the year before, and they got feedback like, you need an agronomist. To be honest, on that project, I'm almost like the token agronomist. Like Rachel would know, like token social scientists, we throw them in at the end. Don't throw them in at the end, just start to build relationships. I feel like starting way sooner than when there's a grant deadline is what is actually needed. So that's my advice to you, is get to know some folks further in advance, which you probably are already doing. Thanks for coming, Louis. What's your question?
Yes, thank you very much. That's an awesome presentation and good to hear. The quote on being jack of all trade versus specialist. This is really interesting, and I'm wondering if there could be like maybe a way to deconstruct this, because right now, like jack of all trades is a little bit negative and negative perception. And I wonder if like being specialized, does it mean having the machinery to do that one thing, or it really means a skill set? So how much of it is the machinery versus the skill set and things like that, and like the market maybe, so that it doesn't seem so daunting maybe to become a specialist of diversity.
So Louis' question was about the quote on, I don't want to be a jack of all trades, I want to be specialized. I know I've really, like the reason I show it, it's just stood out to me. I don't know the full intent of what this person meant, but I do think that just from the context of that conversation, that it was encompassing all of that. It was the equipment, it was the knowledge. And we know that this game that we're in, if we're going to help people diversify, it's all of those things. It's cultural. There was a nice exchange too. I think the word culture was in one of those quotes, but like just, again, even in Nebraska, like, are we going to stop growing corn? I sure don't think so in my lifetime, you know? And I don't know that we necessarily should. I mean, I hear other people who study diversified cropping systems in corn talk about like maybe less, but the idea of intercropping, but of course that comes with like all of the things. So I do think that, I don't know how much I could deconstruct it for you, but I do think that it is encompassing everything.
We're digging into it.
But what can we change, right? We can help them think about, you know, what the profit might be. How do you do it more effectively? How does it fit into what they're already doing? Good question. Go ahead.
You started off talking a bit about soil health. I'm curious, in your conversations with sort of Nebraska corn growers, what's their relationship to soil health, and to the degree they're thinking about it, is it motivating based on like thinking about yields, thinking about reducing inputs, thinking about environmental impacts? Like, what is that? Are they thinking about it, and then what does it mean to them?
Yeah, so a question about how are people thinking about soil health? What does it mean to them? I feel like the world that I live in, which might be the world that some of you live in too, with diversified farmers, a lot of it is, these are early adopters who are thinking about the legacy effect. They are really thinking about the conservation The farmers that we work with up in Bow Creek are very motivated by that, but there's definitely people who see the profit potential, the input use efficiency. The yield, I don't quite see that as much, but I definitely don't think that I cringe a little bit when I hear people say like it's about money and profit. Like I don't think it's just about that. I think there's so much more into it that has to do with values and system compatibility. But the research would show this too, that like that is probably what motivates some. I mean, there's different motivations for everybody, but the next tier of people in the more middle adopter range would be probably motivated more with a message that has to do with, how can cover crops help you with weeds? And I'm hearing more of that. I think that like herbicide resistance is a reason for people to start thinking about what are other tools. But I think in general, the people that I interact with are motivated by the values of conservation.
How many of the quotes revolve around money, the value of the combine, a lot of those comments come back to the, making the farm work. Right?
I think, but I think that that's more in the kind of middle adopter. I've not changed. I'm doing what I'm doing realm. That's my sense. So there's some different populations even that I presented here.
And so do those populations just not even think about soil health?
Oh, maybe. Maybe if you're at the kind of further end of non-adopters, but I think most people are. It's just feeling, even my students, feeling a bit stuck of like, how do we actually change? Like I have shown a quote in other presentations, a student who once said in a comment about like, it's great that the university talks about like, all, diversification and like no-till, but like, it's hard when you're a farmer that's running on credit, like and the bank is telling you what to do, So it's like, my students really are like a case study of sort of living in the practical, but having an interest in doing something different. I see one question online that says, what are my perspectives on diversifying case examples, discussing soil erosion sustainability? Yeah, I think so this question, and those who are online could read it in the chat too. So discussing soil erosion sustainability challenges, what are my thoughts on presenting those as case examples? I mean, I think that just in brief, since we're near to time, I mean, the more you can make it really concrete, like the example I have of the Bow Creek watershed of like, here is a problem that's right here, right now. Here's the community of people who are trying to solve it, and not making it so abstract is what I would say is my answer. Aaliyah responds to my question that was just asked too, that it's worth considering. Many growers may not be the most worried about whether they may be most worried about how they're going to continue the farm for the next few years. And while they're interested in soil health, that yes, economic sustainability, I don't want to undersell how important that is, but I also know that that is not the only consideration that people have. But of course, if you're not making a profit, you're not farming for too long. Go ahead, Matt.
So one last question here. I know we're running out of time, but thanks for your great presentation. It's always nice to talk with you and hear from you. So I'm wondering about your experience with regenerative agriculture and where you see that going, and if you see opportunities to leverage interest in regenerative agriculture for advancing agroecology and getting more ecosystem services out of our landscape. And so I know there's like a big emphasis on soil health with many of those farmers, but do you see that as a gateway to start thinking about climate change and biodiversity and other things?
Yes, I do. So Matt's question is, where does regenerative ag fit into this? And we get asked, and some critique too of like, what's the university doing about regenerative ag? And to me, it's just another buzzword for what we're doing. I think we could always be doing better, but I also think we are doing a lot. I think there's a lot of people who are invested in soil health, in reduced tillage, in profitability. We just don't call it that as outwardly. So I think it's happening, but I don't know if we always brand it as such. And I do think that it is a gateway to all those things and maybe an opportunity to bring more people in. So it probably looks different in Nebraska than in New York, but I think it's happening. But to me, this is practical. Like we're calling it more of like actually what it is. We could probably have a whole few more hours discussion about how we define regenerative ag. What is it? But and I think a lot of the diversified farmers that I'm showing, from our focus group, they feel like they're doing it, and they're really motivated by health in a way that surprises me, like their own health, their family's health. which is not something that I've heard for my whole career. It's something I'm hearing more recently. So I do think it's a bridge, but we have to like try to be in the middle and meeting people where they are, which not everyone is at regenerative ag. Like not everyone is even at cover crops or split nitrogen application, right? So we've got to play to many audiences. Well, it's 1:11. Thank you all for coming and the invitation. This was great.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.